Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Best of Pedalshift. Last Monday, we suddenly and tragically lost my pug, Belle Starr. And listeners probably know she was a dedicated and absolutely enthusiastic companion on more than a couple of my bike adventures. On this edition, we look back on her first big C&O ride. Next up on the show is the journal, and we're going to kick off the journal by talking about the C&O adventure I had with Belle Starr. Let's see, almost 2 weeks ago. And I have to say, it went so well in so many ways, and it was so different than what I was expecting in other ways. And I think I learned more on this trip in some ways than I expected or than I would ever have imagined would be the case for a trail that I've ridden so many times before, and this section in particular. Nothing I did was different except for bringing Belle Starr, and it's interesting how you change one variable on a bike tour and how that can really have a major impact on things. So anyways, enough of the preamble. Let me talk a little bit about some of the things that I learned on this. A little bit of backstory. I talked about this on a prior episode of the show, but I took the train out from DC to Cumberland, Maryland, which is the end of the C&O, also the beginning of the Gap, or the end of the Gap, depending on your point of view. It's the sort of the junction of the two places. The issue that I knew going in was that the weather wasn't going to be as ideal as I would have liked. It was going to be cold on a couple of nights, and I knew that going in, although as we'll talk about in a little bit, the degree to which it got cold, I was not expecting, and it was not properly forecast. The other thing was that I knew that there had been some rain on the trail segments, including a pretty heavy day of rain. I believe it was on the Wednesday before, so a couple of days before I went out there. And I went out there on a Friday, wasn't intending on doing any riding on Friday, but was going to start in earnest on Saturday. So that's sort of the basics. I was going to take the train out and ride all the way back. That was the basic idea. So I get into Cumberland on Friday night, and the sun was setting in about a half hour. I had lights, and I got to the point where I was just sort of... Ordinarily, I would have gone right to camp and just kind of shut things down, but I was kind of ready to have a beer and have a nice dinner. I had Belle Starr with me, and of course, most places that serve food, in many places around the country, around the U.S. at least, don't allow dogs in. But Belle Starr is such a low-profile dog, and she's so happy and content inside her Sherpa bag, which is what I was traveling with. And I thought, okay, well, why don't I just take her in? I've done this in places like New York City and other places around here in the DC area, and she's perfectly content to just be down by my feet and chill out there. And that's what we did. So we went to the Krabby Pig, and everything was all good, and she was quiet, and nobody knew the wiser, and everybody was happy. So I started off, and I think I ended up putting up a picture of the inaugural beer for the tour, and that was a good way to kick things off. They were about ready to wrap things up and close not long after I was done, so I loaded Belle Starr back up on the bike, and we rode to the YMCA in Cumberland, and we stayed the night there, and woke up the next morning. It was a bit on the chilly side overnight, and as I mentioned, the forecast had been for chillier temperatures, but it was not too bad. I had plenty of stuff, and of course, when you're with a dog, you've got the combined body warmth and all that other kind of stuff. So that went very well, and I found that the Cumberland YMCA is a really nice place to kick off a tour. You got to pay $12, which from a camping perspective, a lot of people say no to spending money to sleep on the ground. Basically, the one thing that was really nice is that it was drizzling that night, and for me, I was all set to go to Evetts Creek, which is the first campsite on the C&O, but when given the choice between having wet gear and a wet tent to pack up in the morning and not, the picnic shelter that is part of the campsite at the YMCA was the thing that sort of beckoned to me. So I decided, why don't I spend the money and be there? And I think that was the right choice for me that night. So got up the next morning, got a bit of a late start, and there were a variety of reasons for that, but got a late start and rolled out of town and got things all together and finally started down the trail. It might have been close to 11 a.m. all of the different things that I learned on this trip, one of the things that I learned is that with Belle, getting up and out early didn't really happen the way that I expected to. Normally, she rousts us up very early in the morning here at home, but when I'm out in the tent, she doesn't. She's perfectly content just staying in the tent for as long as possible. So that sort of got us to a late start, and that was one of the things that had an impact later on the day, of course. So during this time of year, it's early enough in the spring that I don't have, 10, 12 hours of sunlight. It's a lot less than that. So as I was working my way down the trail, I was noticing that the clock was ticking a little bit more. I think that the number one thing that I noticed with her is I went a lot slower with her on the bike. And I'm surprised I didn't think about this before going. I knew that she was more weight. I knew that there would be consequences to that. But I've done so many shakedown rides and didn't notice that I was going a lot slower with her. I mean, I think I was going a lot more purposefully. And of course, I'm focused on her safety throughout all of this. The consequence of having her on the front of the bike means that some of the weight that I keep on the front ends up on the back. So it changes the weight structure of things around. And what I noticed was for the first 30 miles on that day, everything was fine. I got up to the Pawpaw Tunnel. It was all great. It all worked. It was fine. I was hydrating and eating just great. But miles 30 through 60 were a slog. And what I noticed on the few days that I was riding was that the first 30 miles felt fine. But because of the extra weight and also just the nature of where her weight was, made it harder to kind of steer. Not that I had to steer a lot because I'm on a trail, but it did create a different cycling situation. Again, focusing on the safety of the scenario, I'm putting a lot more effort into all of these things as I cycle. So much harder with the extra weight. And I found that I was about, let's see, I would normally go about 10 miles per hour. I was probably traveling no more than like 7.5 or 8 miles per hour. And that, of course, adds up over time. I wasn't traveling very fast, and the fatigue level went way, way up compared to what I'm normally handling. And you would think that I would know that, and that I would be, with all the experience that I have over the years, have figured that out. But because of my shakedown rides weren't any more than 30 miles each, I didn't realize that there was going to be that kind of a fatigue buildup on the second half of these rides. So that was a huge takeaway for all of this. I mentioned the Pawpaw Tunnel on the first day I got there. It was April 1st, which was supposed to be the date that the National Park Service was looking to close the Pawpaw Tunnel because they're going to be doing some rock scaling work on the DC end of the tunnel, basically. This is right around mile marker 155 or so, give or take. So it's about 30 miles in from Cumberland. So as I got there, I was really, really hoping that the tunnel would be open because I knew that the consequence of going up and over the mountain on the trail, even though they've opened up a fire road that is a little bit flatter, that would be a lot more effort and a lot more time. And I was looking at the clock. I knew that I was kind of behind on my day, and I knew that the sun was setting at 7:30, and Hancock wasn't any closer based on the speed that I was going. Well, it turns out the tunnel was open, which was great. But I also ran into the guy, Preston Page, who did a video of that trail prior to me going. Well, strange coincidence, he was there that day as well and was doing another version of that trail ride because he had messed up the turn or done something that he wanted to clean up a little bit. So I ran into him and I said, "Hey, thanks for putting up that video. That was really helpful because at least I knew what I was in for." And I've got a link in the show notes to Preston's video, and I actually ended up I was able to say hello to him on Facebook as well recently once he put the same video up on Facebook. So anyways, go check this out. It's over on YouTube. Preston did a great job there if the C&O is in your plans. And if not, it's actually kind of cool to see it. And you also get to see what the vista's like at the top of the ridge there as well. The reason why the tunnel exists, by the way, is because the mountains cut through where the river is at that point. And there was no way to dig a canal any further because the mountains go right up to the side of the river. So it's an area of the river that wouldn't have been terribly navigable for this barge traffic. So they weren't going to just rejoin the canal to the river and hope that they could kind of wind their way through. They figured, nope, we're going to, in this early day of tunneling, do a tunnel all the way through and actually build a canal through this freaking mountain at Paw Paw. And it worked out. It took them a while to do, and it was kind of a technological marvel. I think I've said that on the show a few times. And it's always really interesting to go through. Now, this was Belle Starr's first time going through the tunnel, and it was, oh boy, I've gone through them at least a half a dozen times or more, perhaps. But I was a little concerned about whether or not she would be freaked out. Well, she was a champ. She was just sort of looking at me the whole time. I had my headlamp on, and I'd look down at her from time to time, and she was just looking up at me. She's like, this is cool. Even though probably the smells in there must have been kind of horrifying because it's this really musty smelling place. I figure for a dog, it was probably overpowering, but she was fine. She was all good. So other side of Paw Paw Tunnel, I get up, and I'm very happy because I'm like, okay, cool. Now I can start to make up some time. I had a little lunch break. I was still feeling pretty good at that point. And then it is just a hot mess on the other side. This is the side of the tunnel where they're going to be doing this rock scaling work. And there's like sort of rock slides and just waterfalls, and it's a bit of a mess on that side. One of the areas where the towpath was sort of reconstructed included a bit of a step down, enough of a step down that me and all of my weight on my rear wheel caused a pinch flat within about maybe 200 meters on the other side of the tunnel. And of course, that was just a really bad time for it because it's, there's water everywhere. There's waterfalls coming down. It's sloppy. It's muddy. It's wet. And of course, I've got Belle Starr, who I don't want to have any problems with. Well, I could see a dry spot, maybe another 10 feet up. So I rolled up to there, flipped the bike over. And as we know, whenever I get a flat, it's always in the rear wheel because of course. And so I got the wheel off, got the tube in. It probably took me maybe about 20 minutes, half hour at most when all was said and done. It was a little bit longer because of the nature of the area of the repair. And also just trying to make sure the Belle Starr was going to be in a safe space. So she was fine. I think she was more fascinated with anything. I got a fun picture of it. You could check out the show notes for a picture of that. So that set me back, like I said, another probably half hour or so. And I was already sort of racing the sunlight as it was. Originally, I wanted to get into Hancock and get some food and then go to one of the campsites. There's a campsite on either side of Hancock, a couple of miles on one way and about 4 miles on the other side. And that was sort of my intention. Well, between all of the delays getting started, the delay of the flat. Oh, I ran into another guy, actually, and I don't know if he's listened to the show. I never got his name, but I helped him with his flat way earlier in the day. So, I was delayed in lots of different ways, and I was super happy to help out anybody who it was in need on the trail with some repair help. So that was a good choice on my part, I hope. And but it's still, all these things conspired to have me run out of daylight. And I was also getting back into cell phone signal range. There's a bit of a cell phone hole around the Paw Paw Tunnel area, at least for AT&T customers such as myself. So I get back into cell phone range and I think, let me check and see remind myself what time the sun is setting. So I go to Dark Sky, which is my weather app, and I see that the low for tonight had been downgraded. Low for that night was then 33 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right around freezing for you Celsius types, 0 degrees Celsius. That is at my comfort margin edge. I have a bag that can handle it, but I just looked at Belle Starr and I couldn't, with good conscience, have her go through a night that cold in a tent. And so at that point, I was really starting to get fatigued and I was really starting to get exhausted. And despite all of that, I was not going to have her be in a campground in a tent, even though every fiber of my being was like, hey, stop at the next campsite. Let's just end this. Even though we're on the wrong side of Hancock, let's, just end this. I just was like, no, I got to get her to a warm place. And I thought, this might be a good opportunity to say, you know what? It's a hotel kind of night. And so I ended up at a hotel in Hancock, and I ended up coming in quite a bit after the sunset. So I had my lights, which was good. But I'll tell you what, that was a really exhausting way to end the day. I found myself really depleted, managed to get into Hancock at about 8:30, 8:45 or so, got some food, at the Sheetz gas station, which it was high-end cuisine, I can tell you, and ended up at the hotel, and that all worked out. Got the last room in that hotel. There's, I think, a couple of hotels in Hancock, neither of them super fancy, but there's a nice B&B I keep hearing about, I think called River Run, but the hotel there was dog-friendly, so I was able to get her in, and it was the last room, so that was fortunate. Watching the national championship game, the end of that was kind of fun. But I was beat. I mean, I was beat. And I woke up later than I wanted to the next day. And this was sort of just portending things to come as things were going along. I think that the lesson for all of this was my mileage was too high for riding with Belle. And so normally when I do the C&O trail, as you all probably know, I'll do about 60 miles. I'll split the trip up into 3 pieces, 3 60-mile days. It's 184 and a half miles. It's actually a little bit more than 60 miles on some days, but there are good spots to stop. It's, start in Cumberland, go to Hancock, go to Harpers Ferry, DC. Well, that was just too much mileage for 3 days with Belle, as I discovered. And that end of the first day and the beginning of the second day, I was fine, but my fatigue grew much faster on the second day, again at about 30 miles, but it really hit hard there. And so that was the point in time when I was realizing that doing the trail with her is more of a 4 or even a 5 day type of scenario. Because what I was doing was I wasn't having a lot of fun. I wasn't able to stop the bike and kind of play with her, or, just walk her around a bunch, enjoy the campsite. No, it was more of kind of that Bataan Death March kind of bicycle tour, which can be fine on some days and if you're really trying to push yourself. But if you're trying to do this to kind of get away, to have some fun, maybe enjoy some time with your dog, man, that just was not how this trip was going. So I discovered that end of the first night and into the second day. One thing that I also discovered on the trip was that Belle Starr, I brought a different type of food for her than I normally give her, but I did test it with her first. And that was it's a freeze-dried food. Basically, you add a little bit of warm water and then it rehydrates in 3 to 5 minutes and grain-free, all that good stuff. And she liked it here at home. But when I tried to feed it to her on the road, she was not as interested in it. And in fact, I had to kind of goose it up with some beef jerky to make it even remotely okay for her. So when all was said and done, I think one of the other lessons that I take away from this is don't mess with the dog's food too much. Since she didn't like the freeze-dried food on the trail and was fine with it at home, I ended up with a bit of a surprise. Luckily, I was able to get some food that she was more used to and much happier with at the Dollar General of all places in Hancock, and she was much happier from day 2 on. So if you're going to be touring with your dog, I would say don't mess with the food too much. Day 2 continued, and the thing that I found was around the 30-mile mark, I started to get really fatigued again. And I was realizing that it was creating an issue for just my enjoyment of the tour. I also was starting to think about what the next day was going to be about, and I had a whole bunch of kind of job-related things that I wanted to get back to. I thought, I'll be back kind of in the mid-afternoon if I go at my normal pace. And when I realized not only am I not going to be able to get back at the normal time that I expected because of the speeds that I was going, but that I would be dead freaking tired when I got back, that it really started getting in my head. And that's when I was like, you got to ride your ride. And sometimes you're sort of like, you know what? I think I've had enough. I think that this tour is going to be over. So I decided to end the tour in Shepherdstown, which is a super dog-friendly area. And luckily, Kimberly was able to come out and pick me up. And we all went back and we had a nice dinner out. And it was really good. And Belle Starr got rewarded with one of her favorite things in the world, which was a little bit of vanilla ice cream and a dog biscuit that we can get at one of those Sonic drive-thrus. So she was super happy. She got her reward. And it all ended up working out really well. So we had a great time. Even though we didn't finish the tour the way that was originally planned, I still think that it went really well because I learned so much as we go along. One of the things that I learned in addition to the things I've talked about is you got to be focused on safety first, always, especially when someone else is reliant on you. And I think this is true whether it's a dog or it's a kid or it's a friend who's never done bike touring before or somebody who's super experienced, maybe more experienced than you. focusing in on safety, I tested and retested my setup with Belle Starr a lot. I mean a lot. I tried all different types of things. I tested and retested, and there were trade-offs for her comfort and her desire to watch me the whole time. Because seriously, I'm here to tell you, she would not put up with the trailer because she couldn't see me very well, and she wanted to be able to lay eyes on me the entire time. And so that's why I chose what I chose. But her safety was always paramount with all of this, and it was always a concern the entire way through, which is why I did the hotel night that first night. I'm not normally a hotel night kind of person, and if it had been just me, I know I would have just said, it's going to be a chilly night. I'm just going to bundle up and wear extra clothes and, wear a hat and my hood or something like that. But with her, I was like, I just don't want to put her through that. So that's why we did the hotel night. I think that the overall takeaway for this is, first of all, I'm definitely going to ride with her again on multi-day trips, but I'm absolutely going to dial back my riding expectations. It sort of goes without saying that you would ride differently when you've got another person or another dog or another animal with you, especially when you're hauling them. And I sort of intellectually knew this, but it took me to do this tour to realize how much of a change that was. And it was solely about weight impacting my energy and my speed. And those two things really, really do impact how many miles you can do in a day. And when that happens and it throws off what your plans are, you got to roll with it. And that's what I ended up doing. So we ended up calling it a little bit early, but we ended up having a good time. And I think that I learned so much. I know I'm going to apply this for future tours with her. I'm definitely going to take her out on the C&O again, probably this spring, probably this summer, something like that. And I'm excited to do it. And now I think that we're going to have a little bit more fun doing it, because I think I'm just going to tamp down the expectations. It'll be much more about the experience of riding shorter sections of the trail and enjoying the campsite, enjoying all of that time together. So that's that with the C&O with Belle Starr. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.